Will Grant there. Now, in the first speech to the United Nations General Assembly by a democratically elected Egyptian president, Mohamed Morsi has called for an end to double standards about religious and cultural views. He said that the UN had to address the humanitarian crisis in Syria. The Iranian president chose the occasion of his 8th and final speech before the Assembly to accuse the West of what he termed nuclear intimidation.
Egypt's President Mohamed Morsi introduced himself to the United Nations General Assembly as the product of a historic revolution. It was his first speech from the podium at the UN, in which he put a strong emphasis on the conflict in Syria. He said Egypt opposes foreign military intervention and called for an inclusive, negotiated settlement. Egypt will continue its honest effort to end this tragedy in Syria in an Arab, national and international framework. A framework that protects the unity of Syria, that includes all the Syrians without any racial, religious or sectarian differences, and that protects Syria from any foreign interference.
Morsi has long since been a critic of the regime of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, most notably on a recent visit to Tehran. He reiterated his call for an end to the violence in Syria and a negotiated settlement of the conflict.
It would spare Syria the danger of foreign military intervention, which we oppose, of course.
He also tried to distance himself from his predecessor's cosy relationship with Washington. On the video about the Prophet Muhammad that sparked a wave of anti-American violence, he said that freedom of expression does not allow for attacks on religion, a sharp contrast with US President Obama's remarks in defense of free speech.
Egypt is firmly against any outside intervention in Syria, and the other Arab countries whose ministers met at the UN seem to agree. For now, there's no support for a Qatari proposal for an Arab force. Everyone agrees something must be done, but they're all leaving it to the special representative, Lakhdar Brahimi, to decide what that something should be.
The situation is unbearable. We have to do something because it's a real catastrophe from a humanitarian point of view. And I think that, unfortunately, the Syrian people hasn't been backed as they deserve it, and that it's now our responsibility as Arabs to back this people against a bloody dictator.
In his speech, Britain's Prime Minister went as far as to question how the failure to stop the killing reflects on the image of the United Nations.
That whatever may have been achieved elsewhere, in Syria, the Arab Spring has unleashed a vortex of sectarian violence and hatred with the potential to destroy the region. Now, Syria does present some profound challenges, but those who look at Syria today and blame the Arab Spring have got it the wrong way round. You cannot blame the people for the behavior of a brutal dictator. The responsibility lies with the brutal dictator himself. Assad is today inflaming Syria's sectarian tensions, just as his father did as far back as the slaughter in Hama 30 years ago. And not only in Syria, Assad has colluded with those in Iran who are set on dragging the region to a wider conflict. The only way out of Syria's nightmare is to move forward towards political transition and not to give up the cause of freedom. The future for Syria is a future without Assad. It has to be based on mutual consent, as was clearly agreed in Geneva in June. But if anyone was in any doubt about the horrors that Assad has afflicted on his people, just look at the evidence published this week by Save the Children. Schools used as torture centres, children used for target practice. A 16-year-old Syrian called Wa'el, who was detained in a police station in Deraa, said this: "I have seen children slaughtered. No, I do not think I will ever be okay again. If there was this child said, even 1% of humanity in the world, this would not happen.
Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad has suggested to the General Assembly that Israel poses a constant threat to his country. Israeli leaders have warned they may carry out military strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities. Ahmadinejad said major powers are taking advantage of their position of nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction to threaten states.
The current world order is discriminatory and based on injustice.
He did manage to work in some of his standard references to Israel.
Continued threat by the uncivilized Zionists to resort to military action against our great nation is a clear example of this bitter reality.
But there were none of his usual bombshells.
I do not believe that Muslims, Christians, Jews, Hindus, Buddhists, and others have any problems among themselves or are hostile against each other.
Instead, the Iranian president donned the mantle of statesman, protector of the world's oppressed.
Policies of the world's main centers of power are based on the principle of domination and the conquering of others. These centers only seek supremacy and are not in favor of peace and definitely not at the service of their nations.